if you look at DevOps, for example, this came out of necessity for a need with this kind of hybrid role of developer and operations. I think that that's where we're headed with AI, and that you're going to have more roles that are, whatever function is needed combined with a data science capability.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work. Thanks again for making this one of the most downloaded podcasts about the future of work. If you enjoy what we do, please like, comment, and share in your favorite podcast app. And we'll keep sharing amazing conversations like the one we have for today. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. I'm also an investor in and advisor to more than 30 AI-first companies. And as you know, a firm believer in the power of technology to make humans better. If you're passionate about changing the world with AI, or just looking for your next adventure, let's talk. We learn from AI thought leaders weekly on this show, and the added bonus is you get one AI fun fact each week. Today's fun fact, there's a new service out called Dream GPT, and it's asking us to question, what is LLM hallucinations? Or what if LLM hallucinations were a feature and not a bug? Now, bizarrely, it claims to encourage LLMs to hallucinate to help creators, quote, explore divergent ideas. It's an open source project, and it starts with a random seed of concepts and then uses them as a starting point for its, quote, dreaming process. Each idea is evaluated based on diverse criteria, then scored by humans to reward the best or perhaps the most divergent ideas over time. This is one form of innovation I would say nobody needs. I'm endlessly fascinated by the Cambrian explosion of new good and bad features masquerading as products, vying for venture investment since the November 2022 launch of ChatGPT. And as always, we'll link to the full article in today's show notes. But now shifting to this week's conversation, we've explored the topics of service assurance and monitoring in the past with great guests like the always entertaining Colin Fletcher, who coined the term AIOps when he was at Gartner, and Gareth Rushgrove from Snyk, who publishes the very popular DevOps Weekly newsletter. The field of monitoring is evolving rapidly as new architecture patterns emerge and the data exhaust they generate continues to increase. It's about time we check in with an expert in the space. Trent Fitz is the Chief Product Officer at Zenoss, after having spent 2 decades in product and marketing leadership roles at companies like Trustwave and SailPoint. Trent owns product strategy and marketing at truly one of the pioneers in the space. Zenoss was founded in 2005 and has continued to reinvent itself. With the advent of generative AI, it is more relevant than ever. And without further ado, Trent, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the podcast. Let's get started by having you share a bit about your background and how you got into this space.
Hey, Dan, first I just want to say thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone who's listening. I started out, my education was in computer engineering, and I will admit how long ago that was because it's relevant here. It was in 1998, and in my senior year, I participated in a Motorola sponsored microcontroller contest. It was focused on AI. And so that was my very first experience with AI all the way back in 1998, so 25 years ago. My first job out of college, I worked for IBM, and I've worked for large and small companies since then. And as you said, I'm now the Chief Product Officer for Zenoss, which provides AI-driven IT monitoring. All along the way, I've been driving product innovation and strategy in the early years of virtualization, of cloud computing, of artificial intelligence, also including cybersecurity. So in other words, I have a few gray hairs.
You and I have both seen the space evolve quite a bit over at least a decade plus. What would you say are the opportunities for innovation? A lot of people would say monitoring is fully mature, but all of us who are in this space would say we're just beginning. What's your perspective on that?
Definitely the latter. I'll give a little bit of rundown on I'll give a quick history of things. So monitoring's been around since corporate IT infrastructures have been a thing. And so it starts with organizations saying, hey, we're relying on these servers. We should monitor these servers. And then, hey, we have these network systems. We should monitor these network devices. And so then came these monolithic tools. So I'm sure everyone's heard of Tivoli. All the way back in 1989, Tivoli was founded. And this became a generation of what I call these monolithic tools that tried to absorb all of it and create, put everything in one pane of glass. These obviously that was created in 1989, but there were a slew of these things. And so these were really designed for another time. They often grew through acquisitions of other tools and were not, elegantly integrated. And so there was a lot of bloat in these tools. And so in 1999, a company called SolarWinds comes along and a spate of tools like these evolve. And this is basically saying, hey, you don't want to spend all that money on the expensive monolithic tools. All you need is this. And so they started out in networking. They were very good at it. They saturated the network market and then started expanding their tool sets to other things. They IPO'd in 2009. So just kind of giving a history there of 89 to 99 to 2009. In the last 5 to 10 years, the pendulum's kind of swung the other way. And now organizations realize that there's this problem with tool sprawl and they're trying to consolidate. And this is not just driven by AI, but AI has definitely accelerated this because having this data in silos all strewn about the organization makes it very difficult to apply AI and get any value out of that. And so this idea of unifying the data, this is where vendors like Zenoss come in. And that's where the areas to innovate are, rather than just let me collect some data from these systems and decide whether they're in or out of threshold.
I recall a time when state-of-the-art monitoring was literally sending the intern into the basement in the server room with a pad and a paper, and a pen, and recording, which servers had blinking lights and which ones didn't. And now we talk about, enterprise environments that routinely you'll see maybe 12 to 15 different monitoring products talking nothing about what's being monitored or the sophistication of the apps. And so this idea of solving the tool sprawl problem in the infrastructure monitoring space has become a thing. What's Zenoss's perspective on, do you benefit from there being this tool sprawl, or is there a time when we could potentially eliminate a lot of those tools and get back to, maybe a single monitor of monitors?
Yeah, I mean, you can understand how it evolved this way, that first of all, businesses continue to demand that things move faster. And so when you can kind of relieve yourself of the corporate governance and this kind of centralized IT that slows things down, organizations start moving IT functions out to business units, have smaller teams. They all adopt their own tool sets. And so the problem is that this creates, again, these silos of data that limit the view when it comes to troubleshooting problems, or certainly for, any kind of predictive analytics. And so it's, like I said, it's completely understandable how it got here, but things are so dynamic now and changing so quickly that it is definitely a recognized issue of this tool sprawl, and rectifying that as a primary endeavor for our customers.
I mentioned we've had some memorable conversations about AIOps with a mutual friend of ours, Colin Fletcher. We had another great conversation with Charity Majors, who's the founder of Honeycomb, and also is quite opinionated when it comes to AIOps and the future of this space. What's Trent's perspective? What is AIOps, and do we need another term? How is it different from, say, observability or even the traditional term of monitoring?
Yeah, so you mentioned Colin Fletcher. Actually, I have a somewhat interesting story about AIOps. Colin is credited with coining that term when he first coined it, it stood for algorithmic IT operations. But there was this wave of resistance that people said, oh, it's AIOps, that stands for artificial intelligence what? And so eventually Gartner had to acquiesce and say, okay, it no longer stands for algorithmic IT operations, it stands for artificial intelligence for IT operations. And so I'm going to wind you through this kind of how we got where we are just in the past, few years. So traditional monitoring, I'm going to add a middle. There's traditional monitoring, then there's the service-centric monitoring, and then AIOps. And observability is a separate thing, but I'll talk about that. So traditional monitoring is just straightforward. You collect data from your systems. You've got these rules and thresholds. Alarm goes off when something's out of threshold. This still suffers from this siloed data problem. There's some issue with an application. There's a performance problem or it's down. How do you know what's causing that? And there may be dozens or hundreds or even thousands of components in the IT infrastructure that are supporting that application that's being delivered. If you just imagine a mobile banking app, how many systems are in the IT service supporting that mobile banking app? This idea of thresholds, and this came from this server, this came from this application, it gives you no notion of how the IT service is constructed, and therefore what things are dependent on each other, how these things are connected to each other, either physically or logically. So then came along service-centric monitoring, which before even the AI conversation, it is how do we map that out? And this is a non-trivial problem, a non-trivial challenge, I should say, and that is especially in dynamic environments. Anybody can create a spreadsheet that says, hey, this application sits on these virtual machines that are on these physical hosts, connected to this storage, to these load balancers, to this network gear, yada, yada. In today's environments, nothing is static. It's changing all the time. And so having software that is able to map out these IT services, this is a critical challenge for almost every environment of any size. And so these tools came along to say, here's what we're going to do. We are going to figure out this way to take this application, map it to all the things underneath it. And that way, when something's wrong with the application, we can then examine all of the systems underneath it, not human beings, but the software, and say, here's the root cause. This is the root cause of the issue you're seeing. And conversely, it enables you to identify anomalies in the infrastructure that could cause a problem even before the business service is disrupted. And so you went from basic monitoring to service-centric monitoring, and now we introduce this idea of AIOps. And so AIOps, similarly, was created to address this problem of monitoring tool sprawl. And so the challenge with service-centric monitoring is it requires you to kind of shake up the status quo. You can't have 30 monitoring tools and have this idea of service centricity. So what AIOps vendors said, the original AIOps vendors, is, hey, undoing your whole monitoring strategy, that's difficult. We've got an easy button for that. If you've got 30 monitoring tools, just send all of your events. When there's any kind of incident or issue, send the events to this platform that we're going to put on the back end, and artificial intelligence is going to magically, provide the insights that root cause the problem. And so the term, I think, was coined around 2016. So that's the time frame we're talking about. These things, they originally marketed themselves as event management for IT operations. So if you think of like a SIEM in security, they were doing security event management way back when. These companies said, hey, we can do this for IT operations. Well, similarly, the SIEM tools never really delivered on their promise, and the AIOps tools suffered from the similar malaise. And it simply was not possible to just throw data from all of these different systems to an event management tool who in fairness, they're leveraging machine learning, and that's why they call themselves AIOps. It simply was not able to produce the insights. And so those are the generation one AIOps tools it's pure event management. And that's what their messaging was. We looked at that and said, hey, we're collecting all of this telemetry data in not just events, but metrics and model data and streaming data, logs, etc. Now we should apply this AIOps concept on the back end to all of this data that we have. And the key is this. The key difference between generation 1 and generation 2 AIOps tools is the generation 2 tools have that service mapping. So these tools that evolved from basic monitoring to service-centric monitoring, the key difference is now those tools are able to arm the algorithms with the IT service mapping. So if you're telling the algorithms, this is how all of these things are connected and reliant upon each other in real time, as these things change second by second, it makes all the difference in the world in the ability to produce accurate and precise insights.
I want to dig into one of the things you mentioned about the role of AI. We are here on AI in the future of work, and I got to say, maybe it's a contrarian opinion, but I'm with Colin. I think that algorithmic ITOps is actually a better use of the acronym. And the reason is because I think for a lot of the kinds of event management problems that you described, AI is not required. Algorithms are almost always required, but whether or not they need to be machine learning algorithms is open to debate. Oftentimes, I believe a combination of heuristics or rules can be equally efficient when you're dealing with machine data. Surprisingly, that's controversial in the space. What's your perspective on where and why there's an explicit need for AI and machine learning in this field?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's an outlandish thing to say at all. I do think that purely the scale and dynamic nature of these environments do require AI for appropriate analysis, that certainly algorithms can handle most scenarios. And what I've seen in customer environments is that with pure algorithms, with rules and heuristics, they can solve 90 to 95% of the problem. But 5 to 10% of the problems can't be solved without AI. And so, and again, I chalk that up to the scale and dynamic nature of the environments, and also manage, for example, if you take rules, human beings managing the rule sets also becomes so complicated that it's not viable, it's not manageable. And so I do think that for at least a small percentage of resolving IT incidents, it is required. But I think there's another part of it that's more interesting, and that is that if you're able to create these insights from IT operations data for IT operations, you have so much data about these systems that is there a way to leverage that data for other parts of the company? So the obvious ones are for security and risk management and compliance, but you can also create insights for sales and marketing and other departments. And so in those regards, the ability to leverage the algorithms to produce these insights, it goes beyond just anomaly detection for infrastructure data, but enables you to start leveraging the same process and the same tools to provide insights to other parts of the company.
Now, everybody, not just in Silicon Valley, but everybody around the world is hyperventilating over generative AI and what it can do for us as employees and the impacts on humanity. But I want to shift the conversation a little bit because of your area of expertise. Given the massive shifts that are going to be required in application architectures and the massive amounts of new kind of telemetry data and I called it earlier, data exhaust thrown off by these new architectures, what is your perspective on where there's maybe an opportunity to innovate or how the service assurance or systems management space is going to need to evolve because of these new LLM-driven apps?
So I think I have two answers to that. The first part is when we talk about the LLMs, that support is an obvious place to leverage that, where the system can analyze not only a customer's environmental data, but in a SaaS platform has visibility into all the other tenants, can also look at the ticketing systems and see what issues have been created and how they were resolved. And there is a huge opportunity there to simply provide support for customers, not only for whatever questions that they want to ask proactively, but certainly in troubleshooting when they have issues, being able to have some kind of interaction and get the specifics of their challenges and then compare those to the other thousands or millions of other things like that. I think that's an opportunity. But this brings me around to another part, which is something you mentioned earlier, and that's about observability. Observability, as defined by the industry analysts, since we've referenced them a couple of times, is the idea that you have these unknown unknowns, that when you build your system, whatever thing that is, and again, this is really for dynamic environments, and right now it's being used primarily in cloud native environments, which are extremely dynamic. It means that we accept that when we deploy these things, that we don't know everything that we need to know. We don't know all the questions to ask. We don't know the rules or heuristics to put in place. And so the idea of observability is that a human being queries the data. The human being says, how, does improving the page load time by 10% increase customer retention times? Which customers were performing some specific operation when a latency issue was identified? And so not only are they things you didn't know to ask when you deployed the systems, but some of them are kind of real-time scenarios that you're trying to get answers for, get responses for. And so I definitely think that the language learning models are part of the whole observability endeavor. That I think sometimes observability is misunderstood as this ability for machines to collect data before there's an incident and then tell you, hey, there's a problem here, when really, again, as defined by the analyst community and by many of the vendors who provide these tools, it really is trying to leverage AI to provide answers to a human being that has questions that weren't thought of, previously.
That's a really good definition of observability, and it makes me think about a lot of potential use cases for generative AI that I hadn't really considered. What are you seeing in the space in terms of usage of LLMs, maybe to achieve, like you were saying, kind of the holy grail of observability?
What I see right now is there are tools out there it's pretty nascent, but they're coming along. Again, they are mostly for cloud native environments, and really they're for cloud native applications. And so another part of observability that's important to understand, and I believe any industry analyst would tell you this, is that for an application to be observable, it has to be designed to be observable. For observability to apply to whatever application you developed, you had to build it as such. And an analogy that I use is that some people may throw up on, but it's SNMP. SNMP has been around for decades and is still widely used. All of these systems in your IT environment, they support SNMP. They say, hey, if you ask me for an SNMP poll, I'm going to give you all this information about this thing. It's all predefined. It's called a MIB that is on that applies to that system. Similarly, an application that you want to be observed has to be created to be observable. It's like to support this observability version of SNMP. And so that I think it's almost like AIOps, which is a few years earlier. Observability is a hot topic right now, but it is also somewhat misunderstood. And right now, the way it's being applied is for cloud native applications that are designed to be observable, that are built to be observable. There are tools available in the market that enable you to go ask, query the data in similar to the examples that I just gave.
For those who don't have at least 20 years in the space, like Trent, simple network management protocol, SNMP, one of the early ways that we could collect telemetry data.
I was just going to say, sorry for not explaining that, but also it's so funny because SNMP is, it polarizes people. People hate it, but we can't get rid of it. It is this foundational element of monitoring systems that has proven to work over decades of time.
It's ubiquitous. Yeah.
It is ubiquitous, and yet everybody, despises it.
So you alluded to cloud native applications. And I know one of the longstanding debates in this space is eventually do all of the monitoring jobs or the tasks shift to the public cloud owners? Like, why doesn't CloudWatch ultimately consolidate all the vendors, or GCP or Azure, whatever it is? Because a lot of customers expect when they shift their workloads to these public clouds, they get that as a service. Presumably you disagree, and so would your competitors, and there's obviously still a massive industry of vendors monitoring, managing applications that are cloud native in those clouds. But why is it that in the end, the big public clouds don't win?
I mean, there are a few things, some tactical and some strategic. Tactically, if you just set something up on AWS or Azure, whatever, GCP, you get some number of metrics for free to do your monitoring. Once they start charging, it starts racking up. And there's a pretty serious cost to leveraging the native cloud tools. But that's sort of a tactical thing. The bigger issue is moves to the cloud are not a complete lift and shift in many cases. That what happens is, again, if you consider an entire IT service, some components of that are in the cloud, some components of that may be on-prem, some components may be in another cloud. And so sometimes this is done by design because it's the right way to do. It's the right way to do it. But in other cases, it's a risk management endeavor that if I put everything in GCP and my region goes down, I need to have a backup plan, whether that's on-prem or AWS. And so obviously there can be redundancies within a single provider, but many organizations have, as a risk management strategy, have deployed across multiple clouds. Well, these tech giants, they don't play well with others in this regard. When it comes to monitoring solutions, you can't go to Google and monitor your AWS stuff and your Azure stuff, and certainly not your on-prem stuff. And so there still is a real need out there for platforms that can monitor not only the major cloud platforms, but also on-prem environments. That the analysts will say right now that somewhere around 70% of corporate IT infrastructure is still on-prem. So new deployments, new applications that get built, new companies that start, they are far more cloud-oriented, but the large majority of corporate IT infrastructure is still on-prem.
We're about out of time, but you're not getting off the hot seat without answering one last question for me. And you and I have seen the emergence of really new roles in IT infrastructure, IT ops, like DevOps and SREs, site reliability engineers. That whole role was kind of pioneered by Google. And now, these kinds of roles employ tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. It's hard not to extend this conversation out a few years and imagine a time when the monitoring technology is sophisticated enough that it can self-heal. We're inching closer to that. Is there ever a time when you and I are having a version of this conversation and those DevOps and SRE jobs have been repurposed because there's just not a need for humans in the space of monitoring?
So I think that if you look at DevOps, for example, this came out of necessity for a need with this kind of hybrid role of developer and operations. I think that that's where we're headed with AI, and that you're going to have more roles that are, whatever function is needed combined with a data science capability. So I don't think that the world is going to be all data scientists as far as IT goes. I think that it's going to be hybrid, that what you're going to need is people with domain expertise. We understand what these things are in the infrastructure and what they need to do. We also understand the algorithms. And this is one of the challenges with AIOps to begin with, was they didn't realize they were going to need data scientists. And then they've got data scientists. The data scientists don't understand the infrastructure. And so I absolutely think that there will be a need that people who want to remain relevant probably need to start, considering data science training and education, and trying to at least make themselves more hybrid in that regard. But the other disclaimer I'll add here is that at the rate of change in this world, and especially in IT environments, I think it's kind of a fool's errand to assert what will or won't be the case in, a decade. So I think it's simply prudent to say we don't know what the case is going to be a decade from now. But over the next few years, I'd say that these roles that are in IT operations, in DevOps, in SRE, they're going to get more acclimated with data science.
We're only really 6 months in as a global population to this fascination or this experiment with LLMs, and already it's worth asking the question, what are the tasks that are routine in the day in the life of, let's say, an SRE or a DevOps engineer that couldn't be automated via something like a large language model?
Totally agree. And I think that's what's going to happen, is the repeatable tasks, and that will continue to grow in what we can recognize as repeatable and kind of the rote things that all of these employees are doing. That's absolutely where AI is going to take over. I think there will still be significant demand for people. If the machine is doing all of the work, somebody has to manage the machine. And so that's why I think that data science is the answer here.
Well, Trent, we're out of time, but before I can let you go here, where can the audience learn more about you and the work that Zenoss is doing?
Yeah, just go to www.zenoss.com.
Well, hey, I know we're just getting started. Maybe you'll come back and we'll have another version of this conversation sometime.
Sounds good, Dan. Thank you very much.
You bet. Well, that's a wrap for this week on AI and the Future of Work. As always, I'm your host, Dan Turchin from PeopleRain. And of course, we're back next week with another fascinating guest.